Well, I guess the first thing I'd say is that the internet is not capable of doing anything. It's a tool in the hand, and it's very important to distinguish between carpenters and tools and hammers, and it takes carpenters to build houses. Then the tools that they can use depend on their own skill and understanding. So I think the internet by itself is a tool and it creates possibilities, but how how effective those possibilities are realized depends on the skill of the people who are using it. And so, so the question I'd ask is, how did people use the internet in order to make the kind of difference they were trying to make? The most useful, what I've observed, the extraordinary contribution is of sharing information. And so a place like China, for example, where information's been very controlled from the top down, creating a public space through the internet, a horizontal public space through which people can communicate with one another, can be hugely valuable, enormously valuable. Different in the United States, where there's been a pretty porous information environment all the time. So here, it's not so much that it creates a new public space the way it does in China, but it can make sharing information much easier and cheaper and flow much more easily. One of the traditional problems or challenges in social movements was, by organizing locally, you never get enough power to change things. You usually have to ally with people across localities. Well, the internet facilitates that, makes it easier to share, to learn horizontally, to communicate. But I think that it's important to distinguish between mobilization and organization. And I think that's one of the things we're seeing in the Middle East now, is that that using the internet to mobilize, say in Egypt, was great. I mean, all kinds of people heard about this stuff, converged on common stuff, shared stories, did learning, all this. But when it came to the elections, it didn't translate into electoral power. Same thing in Tunisia, it didn't translate into electoral power. And it sort of points out that sharing information is often part of making change, but it's only part. It also takes people making commitments to one another, people forming structures of accountability and obligation, people designing venues in which they can strategize, and developing leadership that's capable of engaging other people. Now, in Tunisia, for example, that's the work that the Islamist parties had done for a long time. Same thing with the trade unions to some extent. Same thing in Egypt. And so I think what it points out is that while sharing information may be sufficient to bring people together who want to come together on a common focus and learn from one another, that it's got to go farther if it's actually going to reach down to the base and transform the social relation of politics and public life. And so I think what a lot of the young people are learning in Egypt is that that's a work they have to do. If they really want to build a popular base to sustain the revolution, they have a lot of organizing to do. The internet can help them with that, but it's not going to do it by itself. I only think it limits if we think that it's magic, or if we think that it's going to do work for us. Look, I mean, this is the third year I've taught a distance learning class in organizing over the internet. I mean, we have an online class. We had 98 students from 18 countries last year. I was very skeptical that that was going to work, but what it did was create a venue in which people could see one another and learn from one another who were already motivated to learn, right? And who already were committed to learn. And so it created a space in which they could learn with each other and then take that new understanding back out to the work they were already doing. It wasn't finding people and motivating them. See, that often depends much more on interpersonal relationships and that sort of stuff. With the Obama campaign, we were able to share information, get to scale, be able to see what we were doing across the whole country as well as locally at the same time. So I mean, the information sharing tools, the internet, were just tremendous. Share videos, the YouTube, the video stuff was great. And that was a big surprise because we were able to bring the emotional content, not only the information, the kind of facts content of the spirit of the campaign, but it rested on a very solid grassroots interpersonal organizations that were being built through house meetings, through one-on-one meetings, through finding local leadership, for training that local leadership. So they reinforced one another. And see, I think that's one of the big lessons that came out of the Obama campaign, was that it takes both and, not either or. And internet allows us to do a lot of stuff we couldn't do before, but it's not a substitute for the foundational work that people have to do with each other. And the question I would ask there is really? Because like, we always have to be conscious of the social structures that exist in the world. And just because we open up access doesn't mean that some people are not much far better equipped to take advantage of it than others. And so, you know, it's sort of like, yeah, everybody can vote, but guess what? Some people have money, other people don't. Guess what? These people can buy television ads, these people can't. And so I think we have to be very clear-eyed about the sources of inequality, and the fact that opportunity is not the same thing as capacity, and that unless we take seriously the challenge of creating equal capacity to participate, and we just focus on opportunity, we wind up reproducing the inequality that's out there already. And I think that happens a lot. It creates enormous potential, but what's got to go with that is the skilled leadership. To see, it's like meetup.com that came into being just before Howard Dean's campaign, 2004. And so the Dean campaign used Meetup to, people could find each other and have meetings all over the place who wanted to work for Dean. Well, that was great. There were a lot of meetings, and a lot of things happened at these meetings, and the mortality rate was just huge because there was no structure, there was no coaching, there was no training, there was no leadership, there was no support, and there was this kind of myth that, oh, people will just self-organize, just let them get together and they'll just know what to do. But that's not how it works. You know, there is skill and craft involved in collective action. It doesn't just happen. And so without that second half, and that's what the Obama campaign was different, in that we did that work in the Obama that hadn't been done in Dean, and as a result we're able to translate into effective outcomes. So you have to be clear again about what requires human agency and accountability and structure, and what is opportunity, and they're just different things. I thought it was very cool, and I thought when you look down into it, you say, well, how did this happen? Well, there were actors like Wikipedia who were very interested in this and who took leadership for making it happen. So it wasn't just some spontaneous magic thing that happened. There were people within it that saw their interests threatened and were able to mobilize, you know, through the internet. People who participated in the internet blew Congress away. Same thing with Planned Parenthood and the Komen thing. But Planned Parenthood said, we got to organize, we got to do this. It wasn't just like people just kind of did this. See, there's this sort of naive belief in sort of just spontaneity that I don't know quite where that comes from or what wish that's associated with. But things don't work that way. And so I think the pipeline thing that Bill McKibbins and 350.org were able to mobilize, but they organized all over the country, putting pressure on Obama very, very directly. They used the internet to magnify their effort. So that's why I keep coming back to this thing: what's a tool? What's a carpenter? How do we develop lots and lots of carpenters skilled in using this tool, rather than how do we just proliferate the tool? That's not enough. The Obama campaign was useful because it was a forced marriage of new media and organizing. And that forced marriage, I mean, I generally don't support, you know, arranged marriages, but no, that was really beneficial because it forced the organizers to stretch their thinking, and it forced the new media people to stretch their sense of reality, and so the combination was very powerful. And the only way we learn to do these things is by doing them. And so, you know, you just dive in. That's what you do, and then you learn from it, and you find people with whom to learn, I think.